I want to welcome you today to a conversation with Bill Hogg. Bill is a rather new member of ACOP. He transferred in just in our most recent open door in February, which now seems like years away. So life's changed so much. Bill, of course, is a veteran preacher of the gospel, and I'm just going to ask him to just kind of give us a quick review for those of you who may not have met him. Although he's new in ACOP, he was a resource speaker at several of our conferences, so most of you will have met him. But just in case, just update us, Bill, on a little bit about yourself.
All right, thanks so much, Stan. Yeah, I am Scottish, and as a small boy, I was like a Scottish yo-yo bouncing in and out the United States because my dad worked for IBM, which I thought stood for I've been moved. So you're kind of like a military brat, except your dad doesn't wear a uniform. And in one of these forays to Minnesota, the land of many lakes, which is kind of like America's version of Saskatchewan. It's just flat everywhere you go. I went to a camp, and Camp Jim. Turns out Jim stood for Jesus is mine. And Jesus hijacked me as a 12-year-old boy at this camp out in the woods of Minnesota. Fast forward to when I'm an engineering student in the west of Scotland. I meet a weirdo social studies student. First thing out of his mouth, he says to me after we introduced each other, "Have you ever been baptized in the Holy Spirit?" That propelled me on a quest, and had a wonderful encounter with the Holy Spirit that changed my life. And shortly thereafter was called to be an evangelist by Jesus and pioneered Youth for Christ. Moved to United States, pastored, did talk radio, did itinerant speaking, and then pastored here in BC. And when I was in South Africa in 2010, the Lord said to me, "I'm redeploying you as an apostolic evangelist, and I want you to work with Gord Fleming." So this is what the Spirit said to me, and it lingered even after the conference high. I was part of Cape Town 2010, and lo and behold, I ended up being C2C's national missiologist and involved in church planting and evangelism for the past 7-8 years or so. So that's where some of the ACOP family, we may have bumped into each other when I had that on my business card. But I've transitioned into a new role that really gives expression to my heart's desire. And I think, honestly, Stan, why Jesus brought me to Canada in the first place. And often he doesn't take us from A to B in a straight line, because he needs to do some sanctifying, some humbling, some kicking of your butt, some chastening, some refining, some add to your list. But really, my heart's desire is to see the church spirit-filled and evangelistic, not myopic and inward focused, but with a burden for the lost and fruitfully engaged in mission. At the same time, I'm increasingly convinced that what's catalytic for a new day of fruitfulness in the church is to honor and elevate the evangelist, not simply as a proclaimer or a gossiper of the gospel, but as a catalyst, as someone who can spark the fires of evangelism, who not only proclaims Jesus, and I think saints and sinners need to hear the old story, but who equips and enthuses and infuses and imparts something of that fire of evangelism. So I think an evangelist like Timothy in the Bible, Paul says, "I commend my fellow worker Timothy the work of spreading the gospel." And that's at the heart of the evangelist. So I'm involved in raising up evangelists, and part of that is this advanced evangelist network, which includes probably 2 species of human beings, men and women who are evangelists, anointed by Jesus, that rare breed, that endangered and threatened species, but also people like my friend Cass Monaco, who says, "Bill, I'm not an evangelist, but I'm passionate about evangelism." So I said to her, "Beat it, go away, not interested." No, I said, "Okay, you can play with this, you can climb in the sandbox." And we're building this evangelist and evangelism network as part of the Ministry of Message Canada, which is an infant enterprise in Canada. We're 3 years old. I became the national director in August. So lots I could say, Stan, but maybe you want to interrupt me or
Yeah, I'll interrupt you for a minute. We're in
yeah.
danger of losing people. You're passionate, and that's good. Uh, the timing of this is particularly about a conference that you have coming up in 12 days that you would like to invite people to. I'll put the page up in a moment as you talk about it. But I just want to, in context again, say that during this interruption, most of my work as the regional director for the Pacific region of ACOP has been with the lead pastors. And with you and with about 4 or 5 others, I'm wanting to give you a little platform. You're not a lead pastor, but you're making big things happen and God's fulfilling it. So that's part of the reason for this. And I will be trying to put this up on a couple of platforms quickly so that people can hear about your conference. So let me just put up on the screen your web page, which focuses on this conference, and tell us a little bit about it, please.
Sure, Stan. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate your support and encouragement. So maybe the most overused words that are tumbling out our lips these days are unprecedented and pivot. And I don't like basketball. Like, I'm a short guy. I'm 5'8". Scotsmen can't jump. But I've had to pivot, even although basketball is not an interest. I was a failed junior high basketball player, but that's a completely different story. So I was going to do a local church-based evangelism conference hosted by my friend Dave Coop at Coastal Church in Vancouver this Saturday before Mother's Day, and was going to have Message Trust's global CEO, Andy Hawthorne, OBE, out with me for a couple of weeks. And we were going to have a lot of fun, hanging out, praying, dreaming, and doing some great ministry. And of course, everything gets cancelled. So what do? So something began to germinate. Well, let's have an evangelism conference online. And so that's what Seek and Save is, really embodying the heart of Jesus, who says in Luke 19:10, the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. So who's it for? Church planters, pastors, evangelists, but we're all called to bear witness for Christ. I recently spoke at an online conference and they kept talking about the gift of evangelism. Well, they're wrong. There is no gift of evangelism. That's the joyful enterprise empowered by the Spirit that we're all called into. And invite people, whether they're an evangelist, whether they're a professional Christian, like Stan, you and I are professional Christians, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. But let's all meet together in cyberspace. And as my friend Anthony Greco says, we've got some world changers. So we've got Andrew Palau, who's a global evangelist.
Well, Bill, let me interrupt you just for a second while I'm highlighting there how they can find this, because they may not be able to just click on the things that I put up online. So you say advanced groups or YouTube channel. So what title would you give to those if people are looking for them?
I think you go to the YouTube channel, Advanced Groups.
All right.
And you could go to the URL that you've got up there, Stan, advancedgroups.org, then / Seek and Save, because the links for Facebook Live and YouTube, which will stream concurrently, are there. We decided not to have registration, although I was keen to capture people's contact information because I'm an upstart leading a startup ministry. But we thought, let's just have the more the merrier. So one of the intriguing things the Lord's doing in this is, it started as this, hey, if I get 75 or 150 people in Vancouver, I'll be happy. Now it's national, international, global. So we've got Andrew Palau, who's an anointed evangelist, reaping a harvest all over the planet. He was the wild child, prodigal son of Luis Palau, who squandered a lot of his youth. So he's the son of a global evangelistic statesman. He gets saved. Years later, the Lord calls him to be an evangelist. His wife, Wendy, is an anointed evangelist. Some of us will know our friend Sheila Visser, who is an anointed leader, giving leadership to Alpha Canada and Alpha globally. And then my friend, my gaffer, Andy Hawthorne, who might be one of the UK's leading evangelists, and Ben Jack, heads up this advanced movement, which has gone global. There's 1,000 advanced groups across the planet now. It's gone kind of nuts. Then, of course, you'll recognize that handsome fella from Scotland and our favorite Australian, maybe second favorite, if you remember Crocodile Dundee. And then there's Alan Hirsch. And so we're looking forward to Alan raising the question, how big is your gospel? Daniel Im, who is inheriting the leadership chair at Beulah Alliance Church, and my buddy Rod Bergen, who happens to be the president of Power to Change, and a cast of others like Jeff Christopherson, who would be one of Canada's leading missiologists. Jeff will be with us. He'll be part of the panel. We're going to have a sequence of tight TED Talks. We're going to have worship, prayer. We're going to have Q&A and an opportunity to interact with the panel. So I hope we don't fall asleep and become Zoom zombies. Stan, you and I have been in too many Zoom meetings. My face almost melted. 2 weeks ago, I was in a 5-hour Zoom call.
Yes.
And it was like, Lord.
Let's just divert for a second, Bill. And I think that evangelism has become a real good reset button for the COVID season. I listened to the Nikki Gumbel a couple days ago on Carrie Newhoff, and all our churches are reporting how many people are tapping online to their services. Talk to me about that for a minute before we sign off.
Well, there's a new moment. I would say on the one hand, we're not Gnostics. You and I live in embodied spirituality, and the word became flesh. So I'm grumpy enough to say, I love to gather physically. It's better if Bill and Stan are face to face with a cup of our favorite coffee, or we're having a meal together, or we're shoulder to shoulder in a worship gathering. But guess what? We can't do it. Why? Because we're not simply good Canadians. We're good neighbors, and we're loving our neighbors and deferring to those at high risk and collectively flattening the curve. But in this moment, and I'm super intrigued by the UK stand because it's more post-Christian than Canada. Maybe so post-Christian, it's pre-Christian. And in the UK, 1 in 4 adults have participated in an online experience. 1 in 3 young adults, and Andy Hawthorne would say, probably you'd expect 1 in 15 young adults to engage with a church. 1 in 3 young adults have participated in an online experience. So in this weird moment, questions that people have never faced before, you know, who do I pray to? How do I get through this? What's happening when my finances, my life, my identity is unraveling? What happens if I die? I think creates more than a spiritual curiosity. It raises deep existential questions, which only the gospel can respond to. And then online, there's an anonymity. You can sit there in your boxer shorts with a cup of coffee and stream gospel content, and nobody can engage with you because why? You're sitting in your living room, or you're there with your family and you're gathering and you haven't been at church for 15 years. So
Thanks,
I think
Bill. I'm going to interrupt you just to keep this, you're pitching it good. Give us one good reason why the ACOP of Pacific or anybody else that happens to see this should sign on for you for your conference on Wednesday, June the 17th.
It's going to light a fire under you. You'll be refreshed and encouraged. We've got some great leading voices who are thought leaders or frontline practitioners. And because they're spinning their wheels and they can't fly, you know, we've had the privilege of gathering the Galacticos, and we just want to serve you, bless you, encourage you, put wind in your sails, and pray that, as Nikki Gumbel said, the Holy Spirit's not confused by Zoom, and that as we convene on YouTube, Facebook Live, we meet in cyberspace, God will stir you up to be a fruitful witness and a bold evangelist for Jesus' sake.
Thanks, Bill. I trust many will sign on for your